I have spent hundreds of hours going through the content of these science communicators. Not for this video, not exactly, but it does mean that I have some authority over someone who hasn't done that work. So while it will be an opinionated list, think twice before casting it out as mere subjective opinion. The focus of this video is indeed science, but I do not believe in the final analysis that you can separate it from philosophy or even politics for that matter. Hence the description of my channel. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Neil deGrasse Tyson, F tier. The most obnoxious, arrogant, annoying guy on the list. And that's saying a lot since this list is full of such people. People devoid of humility. Now, I don't personally care much about the trans issue, but it is a low-hanging fruit to humiliate Neil. He is one of those science pros who confidently stood behind the movement. He gave his support to a bunch of ideas which are now considered to be ideas which have no basis in science whatsoever.
A team can't beat the Lakers is because of societal bias.
What you're saying is not Scientific American says that. An editor for Scientific American says that who no longer has the job. So don't indict a 170-year-old magazine because somebody...
Okay, this is called Scientific American, and they're printing something
because someone enters the cesspool that is social media and then participates in that exchange. So
why can't you
let's
just
talk about science?
Why can't you just say this is not scientific and Scientific American should do better?
Well, does she still have her job?
No, not because of this. I said the scandal is not her tweet. The scandal,
because that was like a year ago, was it? Which one was a year ago?
I think a year ago, women still couldn't beat men in basketball or any other sport. And it wasn't because of society. You don't see a problem.
By the way,
here?
long-distance swimming, women might actually have the advantage. You can look into that. Yeah.
Maybe long-distance swimming,
Yeah.
yes. Okay.
Yeah, just, I've looked into it. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to file you under part of the problem.
Furthermore, Neil has consistently downplayed the importance of philosophy in science. There's no shortage of examples where philosophy has guided science. The whole argument, the covariance principle, decoherence, Bell's theorem, and of course one of the most important recent example is Michael Levin.
Has the property of intelligence. So explain what you mean when you say embodying intelligence, and also what you mean by intelligent.
Yeah. Let's see, and just a quick thing to finish real quick the previous thought, which is that the reason I think this stuff is not these are not questions of philosophy. These are very practical questions of science because they lead to specific actionable technology. So the idea that what's going on in cancer is a shrinking of the cognitive light cone leads directly to a research program where you say, well, instead of killing these cells with toxic chemotherapies because I believe that they're genetically irrevocably damaged, maybe what we can do is force them into better electrical networks with their neighbors, and that's exactly what we've done. And so we've had lots of success expressing strong human oncogenes in frog embryo cells, and then leaving the oncoproteins be, but instead making sure that they're connected into tight electrical networks with their neighbors, and they normalize. They make nice skin, nice muscle. They do their normal thing instead of being metastatic, and so that kind of thing, it's very important to me that all these ideas, and so we'll talk about in a minute about Platonic space and things like that. It's important to me that all of these ideas don't just remain as kind of philosophical musings, but they have to make contact with the real world, and specifically not just explaining stuff that was done before, but facilitating new advances. They have to enable new research programs that weren't possible before. That's what I think is the value of all of this kind of these deep philosophical discussions.
Levin's accomplishments directly stem from him stepping out of the standard gene-centric materialist reductionist paradigm, i.e. doing philosophy. Neil is utterly ignorant of the history of scientific development and of how actual science actually works. What Neil communicates is very much approved science or science TM, and his content is at best useful for getting a degree. If that's your cup of tea, go for it. But you sure won't find anything outside of the materialist reductionist paradigm from Neil because that is his philosophy. Next, Mr. Professor Dave, F tier, another obnoxious chap. Again, don't care much about the trans issue, but they make it so easy. Mr. Professor Dave here gave the scientific seal of approval to the trans movement, mostly by doing the only thing these brain-dead people know how to do, name calling.
woke ideology. And I guess that leads us to the final section, which is about how this guy contextualizes all of this within the left-right culture war in America. Now, I've said before that this is the main argument trans activists have, and that's why they refuse to accept that someone like me can be against trans identity even while being a hardcore left-wing progressive who literally just made, as his video prior to this one, a video explaining how communism is awesome and anyone to the right of Stalin should be thrown into the gulag. Seriously though, this is their main argument. The wrong side of history, Christo-fascist ethno-nationalists are the ones who are against trans identity, and since we're not them, we have to support trans identity, which is a very ignorant way of thinking, which I remember was part of my own thought process when I was much younger, but I'm happy to say I've grown out of that. But this guy is just the most committed to this type of argumentation I've ever seen, to the extent that he's claiming that
this increasing attack we have been seeing on trans rights, women's rights, education, and so many other things is specifically fueled by Christian nationalists and the propaganda they peddle.
Actually, that's not too bad of a thing to say. I mean, it's a little simplistic, but certainly in the US, the vast majority of the criticism is coming from the Christian right, so I guess in that sense that's kind of accurate.
Talking points from the right that deny transness or seek to strip women of their reproductive rights are always evangelical, whether outright or covert.
Wait, I'm sorry, always evangelical? So not one person opposes trans identity for any other reason? To be fair, he's not quite so insane. He actually says that criticism from the right is always evangelical. So maybe he's aware that in the UK, and to a lesser extent in the US, there is a lot of criticism that comes from radical feminist, Marxist, and a bog-standard liberal perspective. And a criticism of trans identity from these perspectives is obviously not evangelical in any sense, covert or not. I mean, the real proof of this is that my criticisms of trans identity come from a left-wing perspective, and yet I am also an evangelical Christian. But my criticisms of trans identity aren't evangelical at all. That's how unrelated left-wing criticisms of trans identity are to evangelical Christianity, even in the rare case of someone like me where they overlap as someone who is left-wing, evangelical, and critical of trans identity, they still don't intersect. The funny thing is, since Dave said that criticism of trans identity from the right is always evangelical, he'd therefore have to be admitting that all of the criticism in the UK, in Australia, in much of the rest of the world where evangelicals aren't a significant presence, all of that must be left-wing, which is actually a huge concession. At that point, he's admitting something that most trans activists would be incredibly reluctant to admit at all. Someone like J.K. Rowling isn't a fascist. She's not far right. According to Dave, she's not right-wing at all. She must be left-wing because she's not an evangelical. So that sort of defeats their own argument of we have to support trans identity because only conservatives oppose it. Well, clearly that's not true because there's lots of non-evangelicals who, according to him, must be left-wing. So I don't know what he's talking about saying that people who oppose trans identity have just consumed loads of conservative propaganda.
And most people still have not lifted a finger to get past the conservative propaganda that surrounds them regarding this topic, which serves exclusively to polarize people to the right.
Wow, conservative propaganda moves people to the right? What fantastic insight.
Well, to be fair, he did more than name-calling in his trans video. He gave arguments that went from bad to worse. King Critical has covered it much better than I ever can, link in the description. If you want good grades in your chemistry test, Dave may very well be a good choice for you. He used to be a high school teacher after all. But this low-level clergy of the scientific orthodoxy can't offer you anything beyond the materialist reductionist paradigm. Next, Joe Rogan, D tier. Joe's pretty cool actually. Better than Tyson and Dave. Next, Richard Dawkins, D tier. Dawkins.
Richard Dawkins, who's a very smart man, is in this area not very smart at all. He's a very bigoted skeptic, and he came to interview me for his most recent TV series in Britain. He had one against religion, a two-part polemic called The Root of All Evil, and his most recent series was called Enemies of Reason. It was about research in parapsychology and alternative medicine. They didn't tell me it was called Enemies of Reason beforehand when they asked me to take part, but I've had enough experience of these negative media treatments, and I'd seen his previous series that I was very suspicious, and I said I'll only agree to take part if it's a genuine scientific discussion about evidence, and if he's really open to discussing the evidence, otherwise there's no point. And they gave me a written, and I said I want it in writing. They gave me a written assurance that this was the case. So I agreed to meet him, and he came to see me. And we started off, there was a handheld camera, they put us facing each other, and he started off by saying, he said, I dare say we agree about quite a number of things, Rupert. He said, but let me tell you what worries me about you. And I said, okay, what worries me about me? And he said, what worries me about you is you're prepared to believe almost anything, and science should be based on the minimum number of beliefs. So I said, well, okay, well, let me tell you what worries me about you. I said, you come across as prejudiced and bigoted, and I think you give science a bad name. So we didn't get very far with that conversation. So then he said, the trouble with telepathy is that people are, then he said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. It's a standard skeptical slogan. So I said, well, what's the extraordinary claim? I said, the majority of sane, normal people in Britain believe they've had telepathic experiences. In that sense, it's not extraordinary, it's ordinary. Most people have had it. You're making the claim that most people are deluded about their own experience. Where's your extraordinary evidence for that? He couldn't produce any at all. He just said, oh, people have a very false sense of statistics and probability and stuff, generic arguments. Then I said, well, look, okay, why don't we get down to the evidence and actually discuss the evidence, which is why we've met. He said, I don't want to talk about the evidence. And I said, well, why not? And he said, there isn't time. And I said, well, we've got plenty of time. He said, it's too complicated. And I said, no, it isn't. He said, anyway, it's not what this program's about. And so I said, well, I'd sent him my papers, 3 or 4 papers, 2 weeks before so he could look at them. He hadn't looked at them. And he was just trying to trap me into saying something silly and then put that on TV.
Right.
So I said, okay, well then there's been a misunderstanding, because I said I didn't want to take part in yet another low-grade debunking program. He said, it's not a low-grade debunking program, it's a high-grade debunking program. So then the producer said, cut, and the cameras stopped rolling. And so then I said to the director, is this a debunking program or not? He said, yes, it's another Richard Dawkins polemic.
Now, Sheldrake has been rather defamed by the scientific orthodoxy, and this video is not about making a case for his theories, but if this incident is true, and it seems true enough, Dawkins hasn't denied it or anything, well then it paints him in a rather bad light, doesn't it? Dennis Noble, who was one of the examiners of Dawkins' PhD thesis, has said similar things about him. You can't expect to go beyond this gene-centric paradigm with the help of the author of The Selfish Gene. Next, Eric Weinstein, D tier. So, there's a kind of person, the NPC, or let's say the bitter atheist who grew up in a religious environment and whatnot, and was a hardcore believer, but somewhere along the lines, their belief was shattered by the science TM. But they still have that hardcore religious impulse, so they find something else to believe. And what could be better than the science TM? These people will be like, how could people even listen to these crackpot pseudoscientists like Rupert Sheldrake? How could they tune in to Joe Rogan spouting off about morphic fields instead of sticking with the real experts like Richard Dawkins? Especially after that whole TEDx debacle where Sheldrake led a mob of fringe thinkers to storm the gates of the proper science, trashing the beautiful shining beacon of truth that is the peer review process and the scientific establishment. Well, you have to understand that to most people, that's not a shining beacon of truth at all. That's a dirty, disgusting brothel on top of a dusty, get-kept ivory tower run by grant-chasing bureaucrats who suppress anything that doesn't fit their dogmatic materialist worldview, selling out the frontiers of human knowledge and dooming us all to another century of stale, reductionist thinking that ignores consciousness, holistic biology, and the real mysteries of life. And of course, there's mutilating children. Eric is the kind of person that exposes what's going on there, and so naturally he is quite hated by those who have found the science TM as the new outlet for their fundamentalist religious impulses. Next, Science File the AI, C tier. Obligatory praise to our future AI overlord. Next, Kurzgesagt, B tier. Kurzgesagt is genuinely one of the good ones. I love the animation, I love the birds, I love the topics, and just love the general vibe of Kurzgesagt. It inspires the awe and wonder that Dawkins only gives lip service to, and they do the natural philosophy that everyone should. Take the free will video for example. That's one step too deep into philosophy for the typical science bros. Next, See the Pattern, A tier. Now we are getting into some real good stuff. I'm gonna be honest, I'm too dumb to understand most of what this guy says, but from what I do understand, it seems as if we are passing off interpretations as facts when it comes to a lot of astronomical things, if not the entire field of astronomy itself. If you are an utilitarian or whatever, you will not exactly get good materials to pass your physics exams or whatever here. You can just go to ChatGPT or Neil or Dave for that. What you will get here is just a lot of questions and a desire for understanding. Next, Dialect, A tier. This entire gem of a channel is dedicated to proving Einstein wrong, or going beyond Einstein, however you wanna put it. And it takes a bit of effort to keep up with the videos and then the replies, but one or two of these controversial back and forths that I did put the effort to follow, I usually found the Einstein fans making fool of themselves. The project as whole is of course much bigger than YouTube, but the channel is one of the best things to happen to science communication ever. Next, Essentia Foundation, A tier. They have Bernardo Castropolot. Next, Demystify Sci, S tier. They could not have chosen a better name for this platform. Dr. Anastasia and Dr. Michael Shiloh tackle every field of science from every perspective in depth. Kinda like my channel, an easy S tier. Next, Kurt J. Mangle, S tier. Kurt J. Mangle is easily the best science communicator of our times, if not the best ever. Kurt's podcast is the only one, I believe, where Michael Levin, John Verwicki, Daniel Smarterberger, Jonathan Bajoan, and Matthew Siegel, and I can't even name them all, just so many amazing thinkers have appeared, and oftentimes even contributed to each other's works. Conclusion. So this is my list. I'm not alone in thinking that last century or so has been absolutely stagnant when it comes to actual scientific progress in any meaningful way. It's as if we stopped doing science altogether. I do think problems are deeper than mere systems of organizations, but those systems have sure made it a lot worse. Looking at you, Deep State. Science, after amputating itself from philosophy and actual real empiricism, has stopped working. Who'd have thunk? Well, the people on the list lay out the problem and the potential solutions much better than I ever could. So it is as much of a recommendation list as it is a tier list. Do check it out.